The picture you see in front of you are people that are casting their ballots, and these are the electors from the Electoral College. A lot of people really don't know the history behind the Electoral College, so I'm going to try to give you a brief history of how this thing was created, and for us black people, why every time the word Electoral College comes up, it should really put a bad taste in our mouths. The reason that the Electoral College was created was basically to try to fix some issues that the quote-unquote founding fathers thought would occur in an attempt to elect a president. Some of those reasons were that the country was comprised of 13 large and small states. Each of these states wanted to hoard their own rights and powers and were highly suspicious of any central government, obviously thinking back to the United Kingdom or Great Britain. The country at the start only contained about 4 million people, and they were spread out across about 1,000 miles along the Atlantic seaboard. The transportation systems and communication systems were meager, if existent at all, and this created a problem for all of the people to be able to, I guess, see or hear the people that were going to run for president. The Electoral College was also created because it was believed that the British political thinkers were mischievous, if not downright evil. So they had no love for politicians. And they also felt that a quote-unquote gentleman should not have to seek office. The office should seek the man. At that time, though, there weren't really any political parties, so in order to choose a president without a political party or any kind of national campaign, and without upsetting the carefully designed balance between the presidency and the Congress, and also to not upset the power of the states, the Electoral College was created. The Electoral College that we know today was not really the original Electoral College or even the original thought behind the Electoral College. The initial idea before the Electoral College was brought into existence was to have Congress choose the president. But that idea was rejected for obvious reasons. They didn't want anybody going in there and bribing Congress people in order to get the job. A second idea was to have the state legislatures select the president. This too was rejected for the same reasons, that a president would be so beholden to the state legislatures that he might permit them to erode federal authority and thus undermine the whole idea of a federation. The third idea was to have the president elected by a direct popular vote, and that's what we really need to go back to now, and I'll explain why later. At that time, direct election was rejected not because of the framers of the Constitution doubted public intelligence, but rather because they feared that without sufficient information about the candidates from the outside of their state, people would naturally vote for a favored son from their own state or region. At worst, no president would emerge with a popular majority sufficient to govern the whole country. At best, the choice of president would always be decided by the largest, most populous states with little regard for the smaller ones. Now, that kind of ticked me off because the people are the ones that are supposed to elect the president, not the strength of the individual states. So one person in Ohio should have the same strength of vote as a person from New York or California. So they ultimately came up with a committee of 11 in the Constitutional Convention and proposed an indirect election of the president through a college of electors, i.e., the Electoral College. The function of the college of electors in choosing the president can be likened to that in the Roman Catholic Church of the College of Cardinals selecting the Pope. The original idea was for the most knowledgeable and informed individuals from each state to select the president based solely on merit and without regard to state of origin or political party. The structure of the Electoral College can be traced to the centurial assembly system of the Roman Republic, and I'm not even going to go into that. Under this system, the adult male citizens were divided according to their wealth into groups of 100 called centuries. Each group of 100 was entitled to cast one vote either in favor or against proposals submitted to them. In the Electoral College systems, the states served as the centurial groups, okay, and the number of votes per state is determined by the size of each state's congressional delegation. Still, the two systems are similar in design and share many of the same advantages and disadvantages. All right, the initial design of the Electoral College was that each state was allocated a number of electors equal to the number of its U.S. senators, that number is always 2, plus the number of its U.S. representatives, which may change each decade according to the size of each state's population as determined in the census. This arrangement built upon an earlier compromise in the design of the Constitution itself and thus satisfied both large and small states. Now, the population of each state I'm going to go into because that's where the slavery piece comes into play. The manner of choosing the electors was left to the individual state legislatures, thereby pacifying states suspicious of a central national government. Members of Congress and employees of the federal government were specifically prohibited from serving as an elector in order to maintain the balance between the legislative and executive branches of the federal government. Each state's electors were required to meet in their respective states rather than all together in one great meeting place. This arrangement, it was thought, would prevent bribery, corruption, secret dealing, and foreign influence. Yeah, right. In order to prevent electors from voting only for a favorite son of their own state, each elector was required to cast 2 votes for president, at least one of which had to be for someone outside of their home state. The idea presumably was that the winner would likely be everyone's second favorite choice. Yeah, that's kind of smart. The electoral votes were to be sealed and transmitted from each of the states to the President of the Senate, which is the Vice President, who would then open them before both houses of Congress and read the results. The person with the most electoral votes, provided that it was an absolute majority, which means at least 1 over half of the total, became president. Whoever attained the next greatest number of electoral votes became the vice president, an office which they seem to have invented for the occasion since it had not been mentioned previously in the Constitutional Convention. In the event that no one obtained an absolute majority in the Electoral College, or in the event of a tie vote, the U.S. House of Representatives, as the chamber closest to the people, would choose the president from among the top 5 contenders. They would do this as a further condition to the small states by allowing each state to cast only 1 vote, with an absolute majority of the states being required to elect a president. The vice president would go to whatever remaining contender had the greatest number of electoral votes. If that too was tied, the U.S. Senate would break the tie by deciding between the two. All right, that was the initial design. The second design, the second design is the one that's closest to in place right now. One of the accidental results of development of political parties was that the presidential election of 1800, the electors of the Democratic Republican Party gave Thomas Jefferson and Aaron Burr, both of that party, an equal number of electoral votes. The tie was resolved by the House of Representatives in Jefferson's favor, but only after 36 tries and some serious political dealings, i.e. corruption, bribery, etc., which were considered unseemly at the time. Since this sort of bargaining over the president was the very thing the Electoral College was supposed to prevent, the Congress and the states hastily adopted the 12th Amendment to the Constitution by September of 1804. To prevent ties in the Electoral College, which were made probable, if not inevitable, by the rise of political parties, the 12th Amendment requires that each elector cast one vote for president and a separate vote for vice president, rather than casting two votes for president, with the runner-up being made vice president. The amendment also stipulates that if no one receives an absolute majority of electoral votes for president, then the House of Representatives will select a president from the top 3 contenders, with each state casting only one vote and an absolute majority being required to elect. By the same token, if no one receives an absolute majority for vice president, then the U.S. Senate will select a vice president from among the top 2 contenders for that office. All features of the Electoral College remaining the same, including requirements that in order to prevent electors from voting only for favorite son, either the presidential or vice presidential candidate has to be from a state other than that of the electors. So that means you couldn't vote for your own home guy. Now, since the 12th Amendment, there have been several federal and state statutory changes which have affected both the time and manner of choosing presidential electors, but which have not further altered the fundamental workings of the Electoral College. There have also been a few curious incidents which critics cite as problems, of which proponents of the Electoral College view as merely its natural and unintended operation. Now, back to the population piece, which gave each state a certain number of electors. When they came up with this idea, they also came up with the 3/5 clause, which is Article 1, Section 2 of the U.S. Constitution. What that did was it declared, for the purposes of representation in Congress only, that enslaved blacks in a state would be counted as 3/5 of the number of white inhabitants of that state. The 3/5 clause was part of the series of compromises enacted in the Constitutional Convention of 1787. The most notable other clauses prohibited slavery in Northwest territories and ended U.S. participation in the international slave trade in 1807. So that's where you get the 3/5 African Americans being considered 3/5 of a person as far as counting the population of each state, so that the southern states, which primarily used slaves, were able to increase their power and say so as far as the Electoral College is concerned, and also as far as their own representation was concerned when they met in Congress. Now, each state got 2 senators, so everybody was pretty much equal there. But obviously, the larger states that had large numbers of slaves were able to receive more representatives solely because of the holding of slaves. So, again, the U.S. Constitution was based on slavery. When they talk about the unalienable rights were for all white men, primarily property owners. It didn't count the rights didn't go to women, and obviously they didn't go to slaves. Now I'm going to attach information. Actually, I'm going to attach a discussion on the Roland Martin Show regarding the Electoral College and some of the nuances. I believe that the Electoral College should be gotten rid of, only because in our world today, obviously transportation of the people running for president is not a problem. Communication, is not a problem, especially with Trump tweeting left and right. Television, mainstream media, and all of the various social networks. The reason that the Electoral College was originally formed has come and gone and needs to be buried along with the college itself. Now that I've given you a history lesson on the Electoral College and how it absolutely is an insult to black people in this country, I'm going to play for you a discussion that was had on the Roland Martin show regarding the Electoral College and whether it should be banned or not.
Calls for banning the Electoral College always reach high decibel levels when a presidential candidate wins the election but not the popular vote. It's happened 5 times in American history. In 2000, Vice President Al Gore beat then Governor George W. Bush by more than 500,000 votes but lost the election. And of course it happened again this year with Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. Clinton is leading Trump in the popular vote by almost 3 million votes, which makes her defeat especially hard for her supporters to accept. Now, the Electoral College is made up of 538 electors, corresponding to the 435 representatives and 100 senators that make up the U.S. Congress, plus 3 electors for the District of Columbia. Now, the Electoral College was created as a way to give all Americans a say in the presidential election by having an elector represent them in their state. The elector would have knowledge about the candidates that the people didn't do to limited communication. But the country the Electoral College was created for no longer exists. So I'm going to go to the panel to talk a little bit about the Electoral College. And Barbara, I want to start with you. We worked on a fabulous book a few years ago for celebrating the 50th anniversary of the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights.
I was heading it up.
Yes, when you were heading it up. And I remember one of the things that you talked to me about when we were doing our prep work and sort of talking about the history of civil rights and racial justice in our country is what you called the zigzag.
That's right.
Of civil rights and racial justice. So, and I remember you telling me that the country would sort of move forward, take 50 steps forward, take 100 back, and we go forward and we go back. And in preparing for the segment, I was thinking about our discussion and how it feels like this probably started with the Electoral College. And I wanted to just ask you, what do you think about the Electoral College? Is it based in what you call the zigzag of civil rights justice? Did we make a step forward with the election of President Obama, who won the popular vote, and the Electoral College, and we stepped back with the ascendancy of Donald Trump?
Well, what we're seeing as I talk about the zigzag, everybody wants progress to be linear. They want you to start from one point and then progress to another one. But the reality about race in America is that race zigzags. You make a major advance, then there's the backlash, and you go backwards, then you come forward again, then you go backwards. You can be in the zig and the zag at the identical moment.
So do you think are we in the zig and the zag right now?
We're more in we're zagging back because we're zagging back, and I mean we're lurching back.
Yeah.
I mean this is not everybody's about leaning forward and all this stuff. No, we're lurching backwards, folks.
Yeah.
Because this is an administration that is as ugly as the Jacksonian administration way back when.
The incoming administration.
Yes, it's openly white supremacist. I mean, look at the nominees. Look at who the advisors are. I mean, he's rewarded 2 of the top voter suppressors in the country. Chris Kobach is one of his advisors. Kenneth Blackwell, who suppressed the black vote in 2004 in Ohio as a black man. I mean, all of these things are truth. And so people don't understand the history of the Electoral College. The Electoral College wasn't just put there, folks, as a nice safeguard for our democracy. That was one of its purposes. But slavery had a lot to do with why we have an Electoral College. This is all, so much of our Constitution was shaped by slavery.
Yes.
And the southern states wanted all these safeguards to secure their vote, to make them more powerful. The Electoral College, 3/5 of a human being, all of that was related to giving southern states more power. Now, what we
black people less power or no power.
Exactly. Okay. Be very clear about that. So I think people need to educate themselves on on the Electoral College and its slave origins.
Yes.
Let's not be fooled.
Yeah.
This is something else.
I mean, so you're saying that the Electoral College was a white supremacist safeguard to make sure that
Yes.
black people couldn't run things and gain enough power to have an impact on their behalf on the landscape. So who can dismantle this?
It requires a major, vote. It requires, just like a constitutional amendment.
Yes.
Just like, and we know what that means. That means you got to get it out of the, the Congress, then passed by all the states, then ratified. I mean, that's a real process. They've been trying to do the ERA for what? Decades.
Forever.
Hopefully that will get done.
For a second, because I want to go back to the history of the Electoral College and its roots in race. And so for that, we are going to go to our panelist that is joining us from West Palm Beach, Florida by Skype, Christopher Metzler, the president and CEO and chief innovator of JMI Group. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning.
So we talked to you about the roots of the Electoral College and its basis in slavery early on in this period, in another very dark period in U.S. history. What could you share with us?
Well, of course, during that period of time, what policies, practices, procedures, etc., did not have some relationship to the badges and incidents of slavery. I mean, that when the Electoral College was put in place, it was like any other effort. And so badges and incidents of slavery came with that, of course. That's not news, or I don't think that's really anything that we would expect differently. But let's keep in mind, that wasn't the only reason that you had the Electoral College. Essentially, the founders said, listen, we don't think that if we were to go to direct election, that you had people who were smart enough to make that choice. So it was a compromise from the standpoint of the founders of the Constitution. And so that's pretty much what you had relative to that. The question becomes, and I hear all this talk about getting rid of the Electoral College and replace it with what? That's the question.
And so let me ask you, if we replace the Electoral College with the, completely just got rid of it and did our elections based on the popular vote, what do you believe could be the positive as well as the negative consequences on the electorate right now?
Well, the positive, from a positive standpoint, I think it would be this idea of people getting the opportunity to participate in direct election.
But don't I'm going to interrupt you really quickly, just because you said something about giving people the opportunity to participate, but we all have the opportunity to participate now, and we don't. So what would change?
See, she missed it because what he said was key. He said the direct election, and he's going to correct her right here. She didn't listen to him. Right now, we do not participate in the direct election of the president. What we do is we vote for a slate of electors who then in turn vote for the president of the United States. But they do not have to follow the will of the people who elected them. But here's him correcting her.
No. What I'm saying is giving people the opportunity to participate in the direct election of president, as opposed to having the electors make the decision. So that's pretty much what I'm
So the answer to your question, you said replace it with what? I guess it's replace it with people. Replace it with the populace. Replace it with people voting matter. People's voting making a difference.
Well, except for the fact that and I think this is what the founders were very clear about. We don't live in a democracy. This is not a democracy. America is not a democracy. And so if we're talking about going to direct elections, that in fact upsets a number of apple carts. Not that there's anything wrong with that. But I think what you'd have to do, I don't think it's enough to say, get rid of it and let the popular vote rule. I don't.
See, and that's kind of where I disagree with this guy. All right, and again, the Electoral College was formed because there were approximately, I'd say, somewhere around 4 million total population in the United States at that point, 13 colonies. But the problem was there was a lack of good communication between all of the populace and good transportation. Therefore, a person running for president, it was difficult, if not impossible, for that person to actually campaign in front of the entire populace and for them to get all the information. And that's why the electors were voted in order for them, which would be basically 13 plus 13 senators plus the number of House of the number of House of Representative members. Okay, that gave you your count for the Electoral College. Okay, and as I stated earlier, the number of House of Representatives personnel were strictly tied to the population. Therefore, since slaves obviously weren't even considered citizens, for the basis of a population count, they were considered 3/5 of a person, okay, in order to count their numbers and to enable the smaller states and the southern states to be able to obtain additional power that they would not otherwise be entitled to.
I believe that would be ill-conceived.
Did you just say America is not a democracy?
Well, you know, he did say that, but I'll tell you, so it's very interesting. I, in my spare time, have been looking at parts of the Federalist Papers,
Yes.
Yeah.
and you will see, and which I believe is what he is referring to, is that early on, this whole system was set up as a way to make sure that the elite were always in power and to protect the elite from the masses. So not just from slaves, but from poor whites. And it is working. I think in that sense, we have a very imperfect democracy. Thank you so much for joining us. It was a pleasure. Ahead on News One.
All right, so like you said, one, I'm not all that hot about this guy and his take on the Electoral College and the need for it at the present time.